If you add a trailing slash, for example, it will not work. You will get a CORS error. If you forget to add the port, it will not work. You'll get a CORS error. If you forget to add the protocol, it will... Here I have a minimal example. I have a Laravel API project and a Vue project. And then here I'm just asking for a Sanctum CSRF cookie. If I click the login button, we get a CORS error that says access to HTTP localhost 8000 Sanctum CSRF cookie, which is the endpoint we want to reach, has been blocked by the CORS policy because the access control allow origin header has a value of HTTP localhost 3000 that is not equal to the supplied origin, which is HTTP localhost 5173. So the ports are different. These are different origins, and that's why we are getting this CORS error. We can also see this by looking at the response headers. We can go to the Network tab, to the CSRF cookie request, and if we look under the response headers, we see that the access control allow origin header is set to HTTP localhost 3000, which is different than our Vue SPA, which has localhost 5173. So these are different origins. What we need to do is configure the server such that the access control allow origin header is HTTP localhost 5173 instead of 3000. To do that, we can either go to the CORS config file and change it here, or we can update our front-end URL env value by going to the .env file and changing this to 5173. And now, if we try again, we no longer get a CORS error. But remember, the front-end URL must only contain the protocol, hostname, and port, if specified. That's it, nothing else. If you add a trailing slash, for example, it will not work. You will get a CORS error. If you forget to add the port, it will not work. You'll get a CORS error. If you forget to add the protocol, it will also not work. You will get a CORS error. So make sure to enter exactly what the browser tells you to. So HTTP localhost 5173. No slash, no nothing. HTTP localhost 5173, save, refresh, log in, and our request is successful. Back to our CORS file, we have other options we can configure. For example, paths and allowed methods give us more granular control over which endpoints and what kind of requests are allowed. Right now, these are set to a star, which means an allowed origin is allowed to send any kind of request to any of our Laravel endpoints. If we change paths to /login, our Sanctum CSRF cookie endpoint will no longer work. If we go back and change allowed methods to post and put, and we go here and make a delete request, this will also not work because we are not allowed to send delete requests. Generally, these are always set to a star, unless you want to go with that super granular control, in which case you can adjust them to fit your needs. Let's go ahead and turn this back to a GET request, and then move on with the allowed origin patterns. This one is useful because it allows us to use wildcards to allow multiple origins that fit a pattern. For example, sometimes the port 5173 is already in use. If I go ahead and start a new instance, it will run under localhost port 5174. If I open this up and hit login, we'll get a CORS error because localhost 5174 is not an allowed origin. To fix this, we can either add localhost port 5174 here to our allowed origins list, or we can use a pattern like star localhost star. And if we refresh, hit login, our request is now successful. This is also super useful when we have many subdomains connecting to the same Laravel API. For example, say we have an a.myapp.com subdomain, we have a b.myapp.com, and so on. We can just go here and use star.myapp.com, and this will allow requests from any myapp.com subdomain. Super useful. The allowed headers option allows us to specify what headers is the origin allowed to send in. Generally, this is a star unless you have a very good reason to change it. The exposed headers specify what headers are exposed to JavaScript. For example, if I open the CSRF cookie controller, go to the show action and send in some headers, let's say these nuts 1, and I'll do the same here. If we hit login, look at the headers, we don't see our header at all. But if we go to the CORS configuration and add these nuts here, refresh, login, look at the headers, and here it is. Next up, we have max age, which allows us to cache the CORS configuration for a given number of seconds. Right now it's set to 0, which means we're not caching them at all. The browser will always make a pre-flight request. Well, not always, because the pre-flight request is only made for non-reading requests, so post, put, patch, delete, and so on. We'll go to our app file, which makes a GET request, and turn this into post and send in some data. The Sanctum CSRF cookie doesn't accept post requests, but this doesn't really matter. The pre-flight request will be made. I'll go to the Network tab, hit refresh, log in, and here is the pre-flight request. And every time I hit this login button, an additional pre-flight request is being made. But if I go to the CORS file and change this to say 24 times 3600, which is 24 hours, refresh, log in, an initial pre-flight request is made, but then if I hit login again, since the CORS configuration is cached, we no longer need to make an additional pre-flight request. The CSRF cookie endpoint is called directly. Finally, we have supports credentials set to true, and this indicates that our Laravel API accepts cookies from allowed origins. However, this works in conjunction with the front-end setting. We'll go here, undo, and set with credentials to true. Or credentials include if you're using something like fetch. I'll save, log in, the request is made and everything is working. However, if we go here and for some reason we have this set to false, hit login again, we will get a CORS error because the front end is not allowed to send cookies. So having this supports credentials set to true is crucial because without it, the browser won't be able to set cookies, and without cookies, your authentication will not work. So always set this to true. Unless you have very good reasons to change something, this is exactly how your CORS configuration should look like.